Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Alfred Poor, and he is the founding editor of Health Tech Insider. This website and industry newsletter covers wearable and mobile devices for health and medical applications. So he has a good perspective on what's coming down the line generally for health and health technology. Brain-computer interfaces are part of that. We do talk about that and kind of the advances that have been going on there. So this is a nice broad overview of what's been going on and what we might expect, kind of the exciting things that are happening. If you're in the field, this might be old news to you, but it is interesting. There are some interesting points to this. We were talking and before we started recording, and I was like, whoa, this is actually really interesting because we are recording this in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything's still shut down. By the time this is published or released, it might be a little bit better. But he was talking about basically the difference between online conferences and in-person conferences and how you need to act differently, how you need to have different types of presentation modes in obviously video conferences versus live conferences. So I thought that was really interesting. So I'm just like, okay, we got to start this. And I pushed record. We actually don't even start with talking about health tech at all for like the first 10 minutes. So if this is something that you're interested, then you just listen and otherwise skip forward like 10 minutes. And we'll be talking actually about the health tech. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And he had some good tips on how to do it. He's got a pretty professional setup at home because he does a bunch of conferences. And so he's got like professional lights and microphones and fast internet and all this kind of stuff. Hopefully you enjoy it.
Yeah, I've actually done a bunch of free webinars and training sessions for speakers, helping them understand the difference between on-site and online speaking engagements and the different things that they need to know. Some of it's the same, but a lot of the skills that are required are very different.
Yeah, exactly. So before we started recording, you were talking about like there's a difference between Zoom webinars, Zoom meetings, and like live conferences. And we're in the middle of the COVID epidemic right now. And so what is the difference between those actually? Like you were saying earlier that you can't look into people's eyes, you can't keep them engaged, that your engagement rate was literally 10 times lower for live ones versus recordings. But what are some tricks that you can use to keep people engaged?
So again, one of the things we were saying before we started the recording is that the key for me is that you need to start with the experience. Not, the typical conference says, okay, here's the content that we want to deliver. We want to cover these tracks and this kind of information, and we want to go those papers or this company to talk about their latest developments. And to me, that's really backwards. What you need to do, well, for any event, but especially so for online, is you need to start with the experience. You want to start with what do you want the audience to say when they leave? What do you want them to be saying about the experience and why they came and why it was worth coming and why they want to come back and why they're going to tell somebody else that they ought to come? And some of it's the networking, some of it's the serendipitous discovery of content that you didn't know you were interested in. And so a lot of people just take their on-site schedule with their multiple tracks and presentations and breakout sessions, and they just plug that into an online platform. And it really doesn't work that well. You need to have ways that are going to foster engagement and allow the participants to experience the content and the information in a different way that's going to be more valuable to them.
How do you do that?
Seen some events online that just line up 6 speakers and plug them in and say, okay, come sign up and listen. And people aren't going to spend 6 hours sitting at a desk listening to one talk after another. They're going to zone out. You may be interested in number 1 and 4, and you listen to the first one and you forget to come back for the 4th one and other things. So you need to structure things in a way that I think are more accessible. Obviously, in some ways, you want to have presentations that are a start, middle, end, but you also want to have things that are live and engaging. I think you want more panel discussions. I think you want more open-ended kinds of things. I think you want to have structures that allow for audience participation, surveys, polls, questions, and comments can be shared in the process of it. All of those things, I think, add up to a better online experience for a lot of audiences.
Interesting.
And again, as we were talking, a lot of it also rests with the speakers. Now, for a lot of conferences, they use volunteer speakers from companies, some of whom may have more experience than others with talking to large groups. But again, most of what about speaking to large groups in a hotel ballroom isn't going to serve you very well when you're online. One of the big problems you have as a speaker is you're a small person on a giant stage, and you need to fill the space, and you need to get big and project and have this large personality that you can reach out and engage with the audience with. You don't have that with online. In fact, a lot of those techniques work against you. You're going to be a head and shoulders shot. Think in terms of the nightly news. You're going to have somebody, you're going to be in a situation where you can't move too much. If you start moving too much, you're going to make your audience seasick. And there's probably, your hands may or may not be in the frame. So if you use a lot of hand gestures, you got to think about that. There's no eye contact. You can't look around the room and make contact with the audiences. And so you sometimes are less aware of where the camera is. If you're not looking right at the camera, it doesn't register as eye contact. We've all been on Zoom calls where there's the one guy who's got his camera in one place and his screen off to the side someplace else, and he spends the whole time talking off into the corner, and you don't see their face. So there's a lot of techniques, and again, you need to build in the engagement, make sure that you've got ways to capture and keep the audience's attention when you're online.
Yeah, it sounds almost like you need send a TV studio over to kind of set up a camera, and almost like you were saying, like set up a news anchor style thing, because it sounds like a lot of it is the camera's too close and then it's not just set up well. So you kind of have to get further and like literally set up like a separate DSLR camera or something like that.
Well, you would think, but you don't. I mean, you can do really, really well. Again, in the training that I offer for speakers about how to make the transition from on-site to online, one of the things I tell them is I urge them to get an external camera. It's a little hard right now. All the good ones, the Logitechs, are pretty much sold out, though they're beginning to come back on stream. You can buy them. But the problem is a lot of people are using notebooks, and in order to get the camera should be at your eye level or maybe a few inches above it, and probably about maybe even 3 feet away from you. Now, that's fine, but if you're using your notebook's camera, that means you have to elevate it way up, and then beyond that, the keyboard's going to be out of reach. So you're not going to be able to control your settings or anything while you're talking. So that's why an external camera is essential. And also, I believe for the same reason, that's why you really need a good quality external microphone. Now, it can be a lavalier, it can be a mic on a stand. As we discussed, I'm using a Blue Yeti, which is the gold standard pretty much for podcast and online sound. But it's an important investment to make, because people will put up with a lot. But if they can't hear you, they're going to tune out quickly. It turns out it's really exhausting if you have to work hard to hear somebody. Just if you're not sure about that, just think of all the people who wear noise canceling headsets on airplane rides. All that incessant noise is exhausting. And so if you have to struggle to hear, it physically is tiring. So having a good quality microphone makes a big, big difference in terms of how your audience is going to react to you. And then second is the whole image part. Now, if they're looking up your nose, extreme close-up from the laptop being on the coffee table and you're looking down at it, that's just not going to be a very pleasant experience for the audience. The camera set at eye level or a little bit above is much better. And then you need to think about what's behind you. You don't want bright lights behind you shining at you, because then you'll be backlit. Like if you're sitting in front of a bright window, they're not going to see your face. Your face will be in shadows. You need to think about lighting. Now, I've got professional lighting here, but you don't need to go that far. You just need to think about it a little bit, make sure that your face is lit from both sides. If you're wearing glasses, you don't want a bright light straight in front of you because you're going to get a lot of reflections off the lenses. So sort of diffused light on either side is going to give you a better image. And another thing to think about is, what do people see behind you? If they're seeing empty beer cans and old newspapers, it's probably not going to make a very good impression. And so you want to make sure that your backdrop is at least tidied up a little bit. And one of the things that people love to sit in front of bookshelves, which is, it's a nice intellectual kind of backdrop to have, and it's kind of interesting. But one of the unintended consequences of that, and I've talked to lots of people about it, one of the first things audiences do, especially once their attention starts to waver, they start reading the titles of the books. I mean, I do this watching the news shows when they have a guest expert talking. I'm very curious to see what they've got on their bookshelf besides their latest publication. But so, in fact, I have a library backdrop that I use as a virtual background. But one of the things I did to it was I went into Photoshop and I actually blurred the image so that you can't read the titles. So to eliminate that distraction.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, some really nice tips for this. But yeah, hopefully, by the time this comes out, actually, it won't be needed. We can hope.
Well, the new normal is going to include a lot more online events than in the past. We've had them before, but it's going to become a whole lot more important. Part of the thing is that event planners and companies are going to catch on that you're not going to have to spend that $1,000 or $2,000 in airfare and meals and hotels and so forth for people to go experience an information event like a typical conference or convention. And so a lot more of that's going to get done online. And I think those companies, those individuals who are not just comfortable with online, but who are skilled and equipped to handle it, I think are going to be at a distinct advantage going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Just the new normal, I guess. So anyways, Alfred Poor, I thought this was so interesting. I just pressed record, but I didn't invite you to talk about online virtual conferences. You were actually a writer about health, cutting edge health, and so to have kind of a unique perspective on what's coming up in the world of health tech, especially in the field of brain-computer interfaces. So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. And one of the hats I wear is as the founding editor and publisher of Health Tech Insider. And it's a website and it's a free industry weekly newsletter, email newsletter. And what we do is we provide curated news and original analysis about wearable and mobile technology, specifically for health and medical applications. And then we get into some of the supporting technology that goes along with it. But when this started, I really wasn't interested in expensive pedometers that were only 20% accurate. But given the opportunity to consider technology that is going to save lives, it's going to reduce healthcare costs, it's going to improve outcomes for people, improve their lives, that's the stuff that gets me excited. And in addition to working with the Health Tech Insider site, oh, by the way, we just published our 2,500th article on the site, 2,500 posts on the site. So we've been around for a while, and that was kind of a nice milestone to reach. But in addition to that, I'm also a professional speaker and writer, call myself the health tech futurist, and cover a lot of different aspects of this wearable and mobile tech for business applications, aging in place, that sort of thing. But to come around to the neurotechnology side of it, obviously the brain-computer interface is a big piece of it, but there's just so much going on right now. For example, the different forms of electrical stimulation that are being used, either transcranial or elsewhere in the body, to deal with the depression, to deal with pain management, to deal with just a variety of intractable, difficult kinds of conditions that previously were pretty much the domain of drugs. And here we have chemical-free solutions coming that are affordable, accessible, effective, I mean, there's a number of the pain management systems that have been clinically proven to be as or more effective than opioids. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff going on there.
Yeah, crazy stuff. And I mean, I think it's especially interesting for you because you have a different perspective than maybe the rest of maybe some scientists who are a little bit more focused in on something. You kind of see the whole picture because you cover the whole picture. So what do you see kind of in the future? What should we be excited about coming up in the field of neural implants?
Well, one of the areas that just obviously brain computer interface is the very exciting area. The short term, we're seeing all kinds of really interesting things going on with powered prosthetics, particularly arms and hands. But what's going on now that I find particularly interesting is that we're closing the feedback loop. So it's not just a matter of being able to trigger the muscles that will cause a desired motion. Instead, we're also finding ways of tying that motion back to nerve bundles that the brain can learn to read as touch, pressure, sensing feedback. And to me, that's really exciting. To be able to pick up an egg is one thing, but to be able to pick it up without crushing it is a whole new ballgame. And there's a lot of really great research being done in that, and they're making great progress. But then beyond that, though, one of the things that excites me a lot is the whole concept of exoskeletons. I mean, for people who are paraplegic, quadriplegic, for them to be able to get independent mobility again through the help of machines and being able to control them with their brains is just, this is a miracle. This is giving walking back to people who have no hope of walking. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, how long have you been covering this? Maybe you've seen a good amount of progress in this actually too.
Oh, a lot of progress. Yeah. So I keep having to go back and look it up, but I think we've been publishing Health Tech Insider for, it's either 5 or 6 years. So we've seen a lot of progress. And one of the things that people don't realize, I don't think it gets enough credit, is we have smartphones to thank for all this. Inertial motion sensors. 20 years ago, those things weighed 5 pounds, cost $10,000. Now we have 6-axis detectors that are the size of a grain of sand and cost pennies. And that's because the high volume of smartphones, the demand of making those pieces smaller, and the requirement that they be less expensive. So now we've got all this technology that's been developed for other consumer electronics that's making amazing things possible in the whole health tech area.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I mean, I think there is this computation push, like things are becoming much cheaper, but it also doesn't seem like a lot of, I don't know, device manufacturers are utilizing it as much. Like they kind of stay away from the apps, and it might be, maybe due to the FDA and stuff like this, like that, a little bit higher hurdle. But yeah, I think that definitely does make things a lot easier. I see a lot of stuff like if I have to go on a computer to get something done versus handling something through my phone, it's much easier, and it kind of guarantees that it'll get done and monitored a little bit better.
So the term I use is I talk about technology disappearing into our lives. And that's what we need for health tech. But right now, if you're diabetic, that probably more times a day than you actually do, you should get out your little device and prick your finger and get the droplet of blood and take the blood glucose measurement. And then if you need to adjust your insulin dose, you need to find a place where you're comfortable injecting yourself with the insulin and dealing with all that paraphernalia that you need to deal with it. And it's a hassle, and it's very tough for a lot of people to keep their blood sugar within the range that is going to keep them healthy. But now we've got continuous glucose monitors. They're still slightly invasive. You've got a small needle that sticks under your skin, but you wear it as a patch. And then there are also automated insulin devices that can automatically adjust the dosage of insulin and based on the data that it receives from the continuous glucose monitor, the CGM. And so all of a sudden it takes a huge load off the mind of the diabetic. They don't have to constantly be thinking about, oh, how soon do I need to test my blood, and when do I have to worry about finding a time to inject myself with insulin and all that. It just is done. And these systems have been shown to do a much, much better job of keeping patients within the desired blood sugar range, which has huge implications going down the line in terms of secondary complications that can arise and other health risks. So that's what I talk about disappearing now. That continuous glucose monitor, it's nice, but already we're getting injectable sensors that go in under the skin, so there's no wound, and they can sense different biometric materials that are important, such as blood sugar, blood glucose, and you can then sense those wirelessly. And a number of these work without any power to the sensor itself. They're activated through light or some other form by the reader, and those can provide continuous monitoring without having to change the needle every week or 2 weeks or what we're up to. Some of these implantable sensors have already been approved for 6 months, 9 months worth of use without having to be changed out. And my expectation is we're going to see some that develop to the point where they're more or less permanent.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And I mean, yeah, having this kind of closed feedback loop is the ideal way to do it. And that's actually what I see with neural implants as well, is it can kind of quantify a lot of health metrics that weren't able to be quantifiable before. So a device could tell you like, oh, you're angry or you're stressed right now, which at its face might sound a little bit stupid, but of course I'm angry. Of course I'm stressed, but sometimes we don't realize, or somebody might not be in touch with their body or whatever, like something may be going on where you're kind of distracted, and it can bring you back into alignment, I guess. And I think that's a huge benefit for this. And then potentially doctors as well have more data to go off of. And I think it's huge. And a big part of that is like, hey, you're angry, but it's like, hey, this branch of your nerve stem is, acting up, which means something's going on here in this part of your body, and therefore you should check this out or whatever. And so it's a kind of much more granular view of what's going on in the body that it would be impossible to get for a very self-aware person.
Right. And I think, we already have this for epileptics, for example. There are already devices for epileptics that provide early warning about when they're going to have a seizure or other kind of episode, so that they get a warning and can get themselves situated in a safe place before they get in trouble. There's also some very interesting work that's been done with autistic patients, giving their caregivers early warning when their stress levels are building up and that they may have an episode where they'll be acting out and possibly violent or risk of self-harm. So, yeah, I think the other piece of all this, though, is big data. You're right that one of the important things is that we're getting a lot more data that we can work with. The problem with data is it doesn't tell you anything. I tell the story of a friend of mine. He knows that I work with health tech and things, and he came to me one evening and he was so pissed off. And he said, I went to my doctor today for my annual wellness checkup, and I brought 12 pages of data from my Fitbit, and he wouldn't even look at it. And obviously the point is that it was just data. It didn't tell the doctor anything that he could act on. So the key thing is be able to get all this biometric data, like the blood sugar levels from the glucose meter or the brain waves from the patients with epilepsy, and analyze all that data so that you can tease out of it the threads of information. So that information pulled from those numbers is what's really valuable. And we use machine learning and other forms of artificial intelligence to get this information out of it. And then you have actionable stuff. And then you can create it when you see these kinds of patterns, that is likely to mean this or that or the other. That whole thing about providing touch to powered prosthetics, It's mediated by artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence figures out what the reactions are from the brain and tries to interpret those and match those up with the motions in the hand or the arm, and creates this sort of table of information to translate one to the other. So that the power of this digital data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all this stuff is a really powerful set of tools to make all this work together and be much more valuable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ideally, you wouldn't even give those 12 pages to the doctor. That would just be processed somewhere else and give you a thumbs up or, thumbs down in terms of what's going on that way, because there's so many interpretations and knowledge levels of each individual doctor that they wouldn't know what to do with it. So yeah, kind of automate the whole thing, and then we can have more fun.
It's automation, but what I would call it is automated assistance, because what I think we want to go toward, I mean, eventually we may get automated doctors, but in the near term, I think what we're going to see is, like you say, a dashboard approach. We're already doing this a lot with remote monitoring of patients, both within clinical settings, but now more than ever, sending patients home and monitoring them there, and using the system to try to reduce the number of hospital readmissions that are so costly and risky and a problem. And so artificial intelligence is doing a really great job with that. And we're getting the wearable and other connected devices so that patients can do this, be monitored in their homes, sometimes actively with their participation, like taking their blood pressure. But we're also getting to the point now where we're going to be able to take our blood pressure again with technology that disappears into the background. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a company called Valencell. They make the technology that's in a lot of the earbuds that measures your heart rate and your motion and so forth. Jabra is one of the brands that uses their technology. Well, at CES this past January, Valencell announced that they can now measure your blood pressure from an earbud in your ear canal without requiring calibration.
Wow.
So you just plug your earbuds in your ear and listen to your music, and your doctor finds out what your blood pressure is.
Wow. So you'd be like prescribed, you have to listen to 20 minutes of music a day minimum.
Right. Just make sure you use your earbuds some, and we'll get that data. And then it just disappears into your life.
Wow.
Samsung the new version of the Galaxy Watch has just received the approval, the clearance from the Korean equivalent of the FDA. Their new watch not only does ECG, heart trace monitoring, but it also does blood pressure, apparently. The new Galaxy Watch does require calibration on a periodic basis with a traditional cuff blood pressure meter, but it's a step in that direction.
Or calibrated with the earphones, huh?
Or calibrated with the reading from your earphones, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, these are only made possible because they have taken tens of thousands of data sets and analyzed the data they get from the optical sensors and matched it up against the blood pressure or heart rates or whatever measured other ways, and been able to say, okay, when we see this, that means that.
Yeah, that's what you need. You need kind of like a, I don't know, generalized data set or something like this from, I guess, all the same devices or something like this to be able to figure out what's going on. Alfred Poor, this has been really interesting. I've really enjoyed this. Is there any, I don't know, final thoughts that you had about health tech and the future of BCI, what it has in store for us?
Sure. I think the thing I love to say over and over again is technology is going to save healthcare in this country and around the world. Healthcare is on a unsustainable path, and it's going to take technology to make the delivery of healthcare more efficient. And we just need to keep pushing on that. In terms of BCI, that's going to be a major part of it, because again, the more self-sufficient an individual can be, the less care they need. That means less healthcare resources that they'll require. If we can keep them healthier, if we can be aware of changes in their health before symptoms appear, before it becomes more complicated and difficult to treat. We're going to have healthier people with better outcomes, and their healthcare costs will be lower. So BCI, both as a way of treating conditions and also as a way of collecting data from the brain for use, again, with powered prosthetics or for diagnostic purposes. There's a lot going on there. And I think the world's going to be a much better place for all of this.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, the cost of healthcare is kind of ridiculous, and we need some kind of disruptor in there to bring that back down to manageable levels. But yeah. Well, Alfred Poor, this has been really interesting. Do you want to plug your site? Where can people find you if people are interested in learning more?
Absolutely. So the Health Tech Insider site is healthtechinsider.com. And again, it's a free site. And we also have a free weekly newsletter that you're welcome to sign up for. And again, I'm also a speaker. So if you have an event online or on site and you're looking for somebody who has a broad and slightly different kind of insight into the entire health tech ecosystem, I'd be happy to talk to you about what I have to offer and how I can help make your event a big success. You can reach me through my website, which is alfredpoor.com.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Joe, you're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.